if I say that success is not winning, that might sound on the surface like a crazy statement, because the most tangible, most obvious example of success will be when you do win, when you overcome an opponent in a specific match, you go deep in a tournament, you win a tournament, you take the trophy home. It's obvious that these are at least sign points towards some degree of success on behalf of the person accomplishing these feats. But if I say the statement the other way around, maybe people will start to see what I'm going to talk about now, which is winning is not success. Think about it that way. To me, success, even... this isn't some kind of like sophistry here. To me, success isn't some sort of purely objective, tangible thing. It's entirely subjective, actually. I think even when we talk about success in general, we're just using winning when we talk about success in a lot of discussions because we're talking about the best players. And so that's one of the ways we can separate which one of them were better, or when they battled against each other, how they fared in terms of that aspect. But to me, ultimately, success is entirely subjective, and it is relative to the person or the individual we're talking about, the very context of who they are, their circumstances, and what they've accomplished from within those circumstances. So, for example, to give a fairly simple analogy to highlight the point, to illustrate what I'm saying, if you are 7 feet tall and you can dunk a basketball on a regulation rim, a regulation NBA rim, that's actually not particularly successful as an athletic move in terms of what you're capable of doing as a person, or even in terms of in a match, whether that will win you the game because of the position you'll play in the context of how the game works. If you're only 5 feet tall, and through maxing out your athletic ability and potential and developing technique, you can't dunk the ball, but you can get quite high up relative to your size, and you can very consistently lay the ball up, where you throw it up and it bounces off the backboard and goes in. If you can do that with very high consistency, even though technically that's actually a worse shot, it's a lower percentage shot than the guy who can dunk the basketball, to me, you actually might be more successful in this context than the person who can do the easy dunk who's 7 feet tall. So the point we're making here is accomplishing a feat without the context of the conditions of who you are, what your situation is, what you're trying to accomplish, where you started, and now where you're going to be once you've accomplished it. That's the feat alone is not the success. It is this context that defines how successful you were and what success is for you and in the general context of everyone. Likewise, to win titles in a game is not simply, oh, well, that's success, right? That's all you need to know. That's success right there. Because it then implies, on the reverse, if you think that way, that people who were in situations where winning a title really wasn't a realistic option, but they've accomplished incredible things, aren't successful. Whereas some people who were incredible and have won titles, but were actually so talented, had so much potential, were in so many favorable positions that they didn't win as many titles as they could have done. They might have won more total titles than the guy who over here won none, but they might actually be less successful in this overall sense that we're talking about here. I mean, yes, we understand that to some degree winning titles is going to be a good sign point towards success because it's just so difficult. Oftentimes it will be a sign that someone's gotten to a certain point from where they were and they've won a tournament. There are great players, so we expect great players to be able to win big tournaments when they're on good teams. Sometimes people have bracket draws that are good, opportunities that arise. In the context of this, though, that's where we need to start asking, but what is success for that person? Like, if you win one big tournament, but you were never really in the running to win tournaments otherwise, that might be incredibly successful. If you were in position to win 10 tournaments and you only won 2 and you failed a bunch of times and choked a bunch in the final where you were always getting there, you actually probably aren't a particularly successful person. If we're trying to judge relative, maybe the other guy's more successful, you did the most out of everything he had. To give some esports examples here, I'll go with CSGO first. So the VeryGames lineup of late 2013, which in October onwards was the number 1 team in the world until about March of 2014. They were the number 1 team. They were winning a number of titles. They won like 4 or 5 titles. They beat NIP in a bunch of series. They were the favorite to win the major. So this is one of the all-time great teams. They're in my top 5 CSGO 5-man lineups of all time. They are an incredibly good team. They won a number of titles, but they played at 2 majors in that span. One, they made the semi-final and fell to their rival and didn't win the title, and didn't make the final because of getting upset earlier, so they didn't have the easier bracket. Then at the other major, they outright fell out in the groups because of getting upset and also playing the eventual champions, Virtus Pro. So this is a team where they could have accomplished much more. They could have won a major. They could have been in the final of majors. They could have made deep runs in both majors. They could have had more titles even. They lost one in the ESWC final in a massive upset to Clan Mystic, which was Apex and Kiyoshima and Kaylee. I think it was all of them. Apex, Kiyoshima, Kaylee, all those guys. they got upset again. That was a title where once they'd beaten NIP, they were expected to win the title. So even though they were incredibly successful on an objective scale, if we're looking at all teams ever, for what they were capable of, they actually weren't as successful as they could have been. And that will always be a knock on them. That's why whenever we're talking about the greatest teams of all time, that will always be something where we have to say, yes, they were incredible at this. They did these great things. Overall, the consistency is very good. But over here, they didn't quite actually max out what their potential was. Then you go the other end of the scale. The Fnatic team that did win that major, the first one that was held in CS where VeryGames made the semi-final, Fnatic, the one that was Pronax, JW, Flusher, Schneider, and Devilwalk, so no Crimson Olaf. This lineup only won the major in terms of big events. They had far less events where they even placed in this same time span as highly as a team like VeryGames. But they maxed out their potential to be able to win that major. They won the biggest tournament, and it didn't matter that overall, yes, as a better team, VeryGames is a better team, is overall a greater team in history, but the success level of this Fnatic team is incredible. You have to really admire what they were able to accomplish there and the way they were able to go about it with a more limited skill set of and toolkit of what players they had. So if we go likewise and we talk about League of Legends to give a similar example, so the EDG team that was led by Name as the star carry, and it had Clearlove, and it had you as the mid laner. It was the all-Chinese lineup of 2014. They made something like 9 or 10 LAN finals, including the 2 LPL splits in China. They won something crazy, like 8 of those, including the 2 LPL splits. They were incredibly dominant domestically. But what happened when they went to Worlds? They failed in Worlds. They got to the quarterfinals, and they lost to Starhunt Royal Club, who hadn't been that much of a factor within their domestic season. So ultimately, they will always have that knock up on them, even though they're an incredibly successful team in terms of just pure titles. But they never quite managed what their potential seemed to hint at. Likewise, EDG this year, they won the first LPL split. They had an incredible record in the league. They won MSI, a huge international tournament, even beating a Korean team at a best of 5, SK Telecom. Then they went and had an incredible record in the regular split of LPL Summer, but they didn't even make top 2 at that LPL. And then they fell out in the round of 8 again of the World Championship. Admittedly, this team was the one that had Deft, and it had Pawn rather than Name and you. But again, they didn't quite max out their potential because this was an all-time. This was like a team that could have been like a top 3 team of all time, but they didn't max the potential. They couldn't do it. And so ultimately, they had some failure involved in this quest. Even though in terms of success for other people, they had incredible success. Not as successful as they could have been. Then we go to the other end. Let's look at Cloud9. The Cloud9 that made, what was it? Let me think. It was 4 straight LCS finals. They won 2 of them. They lost 1 in narrow fashion in the summer of 2014. They went to 2 Worlds tournaments, as in with the lineup that had High as the mid laner. They were able to make the round of 8 of both of them. They started in the round of 8 of one of them, admittedly. You look at their lineup and you don't go, oh, they were so unlucky and they didn't manage to make the most out of this. You go, no, look at these players they had. So few of these players will really be thought of as the greatest League of Legends players of all time. But what amazing domestic success they had time and time again, reinventing themselves, finding ways to swap around the carry roles and have everyone still contribute to some way, overcoming meta changes, finding ways to battle against other Western teams and at least always be competitive in terms of top Western teams, and then sometimes upset Asians. I mean, what an incredible team this is. They really did max out their success. Did about all they could be expected to with that lineup. They're very much overachievers. But then you look for another. Let's look for an international example of this. So actually, the 2 Starhunt Royal Club teams would be good. What people don't know about Starhunt Royal Club, who only watched, and they were just called Royal Club in Season 3 Worlds, they only watched the 2 Worlds where they made the finals, is these 2 teams were never contenders to win their domestic title, the LPL. They never made the final of an LPL. They were always just like a 3rd, 4th, sometimes 5th best team in the league, and would often flounder and then start to get the lineup together in the summer and then just suddenly make this crazy run towards the qualifier and make it into Worlds and then have an amazing run at Worlds and make the finals. They accomplished making those 2 finals, the most you could ever expect from those 2 lineups. That's more than you could expect. They overachieved. It was incredible. But they had obviously much less success than the 2 EDG lineups in terms of all the titles won. But if you want to talk about success in this particular respect that we're talking about, they were more successful in some ways in the way they maxed out what they were able to accomplish, whereas EDG didn't actually. They fell short in certain key ways. So the point I'm making here is success is not just what you accomplish, it's the way you accomplished a task in terms of what you had to do to accomplish it, where you started, where you finished. So what are the challenges you faced and overcame to accomplish this task? What is the difficulty of the task relative to you and your skill set? What are the outside conditions of who helps you? Who are you battling against? That's a key thing as well. You might be incredibly successful. So one of the most successful StarCraft Brood War players of all time, in my logic, would be Stork, okay? The Protoss player in Brood War. Yet he only won one big title in terms of the OSL and MSL. And the reason why is because most of the finals he lost were to people who would be top 5 players of all time. So he was, in a sense, unlucky to be playing with his prime in the exact era of the primes of the best players of all time. In another era, he might have been much more successful in terms of titles, and yet that doesn't degrade from what he accomplished within Brood War. To do that against the gods of his era, it's incredibly impressive that he could make all these semis, and he beat some of them in semis and quarters to make it to these finals. This is incredible success if you look at it from this broader perspective. So what are the people who help you? Teammates in certain games. Who are the people you're battling against who are keeping you down? Even though in this area you might not look like you're winning the trophies, sure, but maybe you're doing incredible things that would actually be it would require less to win in an easier area. You have to put that into context. That's why the pure numbers don't work. In fact, the reason why I bring this topic up is because way too many what could be very interesting discussions about who was successful here and how good was this team and who's the greatest often boil down to what are incredibly banal discussions which become purely about tangible numbers of this person won 3 titles and he only won 2, so the 3 is more, well, we all know number 3 is larger than number 2, therefore he's better. No. Who did he play? Who was he playing with? What was his circumstances? How did he get to that position? How many opportunities did he have to win the 3 titles? How many opportunities did that guy have to win the 2? There's so many more factors that really are going to make up what is success in this particular sense. Now then, a place where you can win money and find success in terms of satisfaction and enjoyment is obviously Alpha Draft. So if you want to play fantasy esports, description box below, click on that link. If not, well, that's the end of the video. Goodbye.